Hey everybody, how's it going? Great to have you guys joining us tonight. I have a great guest on the channel to talk to about the U.S. military today. My guest is American Ostrakon. Thanks for
Hey,
joining me, man.
it's a pleasure to be here. Good to hop on with you, McIntyre.
Absolutely. So, wanted to talk to you tonight about kind of the state the U.S. military is in. Obviously, we know we've got a lot going on domestically. Things are not particularly hot overseas, but with everything that we have going on here, I was interested in knowing, kind of how the military is reacting. I know that you're someone who has been in the military, has a lot of experience there, and you're also someone who is currently in contact overseas with the military on a regular basis. So I guess the first thing, without going too in depth, if you want to tell the people who are watching a little bit about yourself and kind of your experience with the military and your contact with them now.
Sure. I joined the military in the late 2000s as an officer. I did about 10 years in the Army doing, I guess you could say, both big Army and small Army. So I've got some experience working with larger units and then also working within some of the special operations community. I kind of bounce back and forth between the two. And after my time in the military, I became a contractor, and that's what I do today.
All right, great. So, as someone who's working and is in constant contact with the military in your current role, what I wanted to know was, with everything going on right now, with the craziness, with the riots, with COVID, with the general attitude that much of the United States has at the moment, what is the state of the military's morale? I know you and I have had a lot of personal discussions about it, but for the people who are just listening in, what is it? What's the kind of the feeling of the average service member overseas right now?
It's removed. I think if you had to use a word, it's indifference to a lot of what's happening in the United States right now. And I think it's an engineered indifference. It's I think the lack of general discussion about political topics and the state of the United States, or what's going on in the United States today with the rioting and whatnot. I feel most people don't want to talk about it, or choose not to, or just want it to go away when it comes to service members. And I think that's been done on purpose. And we can go down that, if you want to, we can go down that rabbit hole as to why or how that's been done. But if I had to pick one word, it would be apathy or indifference.
Yeah, and I think you've given me some very particular examples of kind of the way that officers will act, like during morning ceremonies, the way the enlisted men will act. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good symptom or a good indicator of an overall general lack of caring. Is you take the example, you'll have at the end of a day, you'll have the call to colors, where you'll have the national anthem played at the end of a work day, and you're supposed to stop what you're doing. If you're not in the middle of something critical, walk outside and render salute to the flag. And it's something, when I was younger, it was commonly done. Like, every base stopped, everyone got out of their vehicles, everyone rendered honors to the flag. And it's, as I've gone throughout my military service and now as a contractor, I see soldiers and sailors and airmen and their officers running inside or hopping back in their vehicles, or just generally doing their best to avoid the minute of standing outside and rendering a salute to at the end of the day. And it's a small case case example. It's a small example, but a really powerful one, I think, in my opinion, of just the state of military etiquette and military honors. It's more and more being paid lip service to, and then I'll have conversations with friends of mine who are military officers, and most of them just like, why are you even bringing this up? This is such a small thing. It doesn't really matter. And I think it does. I think it's an indication of where the U.S. military's priority lie when it comes to the basic tenets of what we're supposed to be doing, at least as far as our oath.
Yeah, and I think you're right. A lot of average people, I guess, would hear that and say, it's not that big a deal. It's not really directly impacting the function of people or the security. But I think especially probably the people you're talking to right now are pretty on board with the idea that, that ritual, that repetition, that ritual honoring of the country and showing of respect is really essential to maintain a positive culture. And of course, that's essential for just any culture, but especially in something in the military that is so honor-based, where you're putting your life on the line, you're making a commitment to a country that really means something. It's not just putting your flag. Right, exactly. You're not just putting your hand over the flag. Like, you're going to put your life on the line. You think that if people aren't willing to stand for these kind of things, if they're actively avoiding it in a way that they didn't used to, I think you're right. I think it does say something.
And these are my personal observations, and I'm sure there's people who listen to this channel and maybe disagree on maybe that's always been the way, but it's not been my personal experience, where it's the ritual of the military has gone by the wayside, and it's increased in its lack of respect or lack of observation, I guess you could say. It's not a steady decline. It's been more rapid within the past 5 years, I would say.
Now, you had alluded to earlier that the service members were pretty disengaged and unwilling to talk about current events, which is kind of surprising for maybe some people who listen here. I think that a lot of people, and understandably so, because I think the military is more right-wing and more patriotic than most organizations. But I think a lot of people have the idea that the military is still currently full of like a lot of good old Georgia boys who would be, rip roaring against what's happening right now.
If only.
Right. I think it might be worth talking about that, because like you said, a lot of people are avoiding talking about it, and you said that you think that has been engineered, that has been something that has been encouraged from the top down. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you think maybe a lot of the service members ended up in this state? How you think that happened?
So I think we can go back to post-Vietnam and the base restructuring around the United States, and what you saw throughout the early 80s all the way up until September 11th is the shutting down of smaller bases and the creation of these much larger bases that actually hold all the services together. So, for example, you had McGuire, which was an Air Force base, and Fort Dix, which was an Army base, and Lakehurst, which was a naval base, and that it became McGuire, Dix, Lakehurst, and it became consolidated. And then you also have, so basically you have more funding being sent to these mega bases. They're doing the same. If you want a more modern example, Camp Humphreys in Korea is basically they've shut down or reduced the physical footprint in Korea, and they've taken all these smaller bases and all these personnel and turned it into this giant mega base in Korea, which is called Camp Humphreys, which is they no longer have that same level of personnel on the border, and now you've pretty much put all your eggs in one basket. It's now the largest overseas military base that the U.S. has. And so that's what happened in the U.S. as well, is the shutting down of smaller bases and the creation of these mega bases. Most of the time they were placed in locations that were out of the public view. There's a practical reason for that. Obviously, you need a lot of space in order to conduct training, and nobody really wants a base in their backyard. It brings in soldiers, it brings in airmen, it brings in Marines, and they're young. They tend to get drunk and they cause problems in the town that they're in. So I understand, I guess, the not wanting to necessarily have a military base in your backyard, but what it's created is it's removed the military from the public eye, where unless you happen to live near one of these large mega bases, you don't have much experience with people on a day-to-day basis who are in the military. So you've got communities who really are out of sight, out of mind when it comes to any sort of exposure to the military. And you could argue that the intention of that was financial, right? It makes sense from a financial viewpoint. The budget of the military is limited, where you have these facilities that can be used for all these different services all together, and you don't have to build another base for every branch. But what you've done, and the evil side or the cynical side of me says, yeah, but it's done beyond just for reasons of finances. It's done in order to limit the civilian exposure to the military, because when you don't have Joe down the street or Sally from next door who are in your community, when they go away to war, if they don't live near you, you don't notice them going to war. And that gives the government, I think, a freer hand in being able to use the military how they so choose, without much public opinion beyond just we're for the troops or we support the troops. Well, yes, it's nice to have that, and I appreciate it when people, have shown their support for me personally or units that I've been in. But it's in a way kind of a send-off. Thank you, we support you guys, but we're really glad we don't have to deal with you on a daily basis. And it's created in some ways we've created little Spartas inside of a big Athens, so to speak. And it's, I think, to the detriment of the American people.
Yeah, and I know that when I talk to younger people, when I talk to, teenagers, they can't imagine a situation in which someone would join the military voluntarily. Like, unless they're from a very specific background and a very specific tradition, the idea that you would go and serve your country in that way is almost inconceivable to them. And even people who you think would be in that tradition often have this concept that, like, everybody who goes in the military just dies. Like, they can't fathom this idea that service would be part of their experience. And so I think that means that, like you're talking about, significantly more and more we're seeing the military is drawing, I think, from a particular and specific well of people who have contact with it, who have been pushed in those communities you're talking about, or come from a very particular service tradition. And really the country in general is just not plugged in and not familiar. They know they're supposed to say thank you maybe to someone in uniform, but outside of that, they can't connect with it in any meaningful way.
I mean, that's when you dislocate your military from your population like that. It's the chance for the military to be used in ways that are not to the benefit of the nation are exponential at that point, or to the benefit of an individual, because you've taken away agency from the population in having a dedicated interest in what happens to the military. Because in a democracy, or let's say in the United States, the military should be a representation of the people and not just any one section of people overall, it should be a cross-section of the civilian population. And what you're finding is they're drawing from two major areas for new recruits. One are people whose families have military lineage, which is definitely what happened with mine. Uncles, grandparents, father, every male member, almost every male member of my family served in the military. Or you're drawing from people who are disenfranchised or looking to improve their social situation. So we've got the other group would be, I would say, people who are at or below the poverty line are the two main sources. And you look at where the recruiting stations pull the majority of their population from, or pull from, tend to be just outside military bases. So they're the children of people who are in the military or are related in some way to the military. I would say that would be the major source of new recruits, which is nothing wrong with it in itself. But again, we're creating a military subclass or a military caste within the United States that's been going on, I would say, ever since Vietnam. World War II, obviously, everyone pitched in for the most part. But since Vietnam, it's been the population has narrowed on which they recruit and where they draw people into the military from.
And like you're saying, I think that's a good way to phrase it with the military caste. And I think what's interesting is as those who have had the military tradition dwindle, and they increasingly rely on people, like you said, who are looking for opportunities, looking for ways out. We're going to see the effect of I don't think you're familiar with the term, but my audience will probably be familiar with the bioleninism, with kind of we're going to see the increase, I think, in a percentage of the army who's going to be in thrall to the things that those in power could provide, and the people who are doing it out of tradition or patriotism will dwindle, and the people who are there for the benefits and for the status climbing and the opportunity will increase. And I think that's going to have the effect that you'd imagine. Like you said, you're already separating your military from the population, kind of in the way you're behaving. But I think you're also increasingly going to create a military class who, the people will be separated from the military, but I think you're increasingly going to create a military class where the military is separated from the people. And I think that will have that could be intentional as well.
We're getting there, where it's definitely in some ways we get the military that we deserve, and it's because we've become so far removed from violence as a nation, and so far removed from just we haven't been. I mean, obviously there's violence every day everywhere in the United States, but let's say large scale conflict or even small scale conflict, we don't see on a daily basis, not like other countries. It's partially our geographic location, but it's we don't look, as a nation, I don't think we look too hard into combat, because it's over there away from us, and we just, like I said, we thank the service member for doing their job, and then we just don't want them around too much.
Well, we just had a question in chat. That guy was asking, is the American military liberal now, or is it just demoralized? And I know that's a hard line to draw, but
so I mean, just from what I've read, as far as who's going to vote for who, you could say that there are more left-leaning people in the military now than there have been in the past. Yeah, I would say that's true. As if the military is more left or more right at this point, I doubt it. I mean, that's a tough question. It's I don't have a census of obviously everyone serving the military. I would say that the closer you get to combat roles, they lean more towards the right. So the more so further away, like if you get into logistics and transportation and non-combat roles, I would say those are the individuals who would lean more to the left. But then as you get into, infantry and aviation and artillery, you find individuals are leaning more towards the right. And part of, you could also say that falls along race lines as well. Their combat roles are more often filled by white males than other roles in the military. And so there, is there a racial aspect to it? If you're a white male, you're obviously going to most likely lean more towards the right than the left. So yeah, is it more liberal now than it was 10 years ago? Yeah. Is it more liberal than, let's say, conservative overall in the military? That's a tougher question to have a definitive answer to.
Well, let's move on to the progressive influence on the military as it stands right now.
Sure.
So one of the things that's been very big in the news right now is, we've seen a lot of talk about critical race theory. We've seen a lot about critical race theory training. Trump just had an executive order about banning critical race theory training inside certain branches of the government. But we've heard a lot about, especially at the service academies, but even working its way down into your average soldier, a lot about, sensitivity training, social justice training, critical race theory training. Is that something that you've seen or that you've heard about in your experience?
I have, and it's become more prevalent in the past few years, where it tends not to be people who are currently wearing the uniform who actually fill those roles, but I would say civilians that have been hired on by the military in order to perform that training for soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines. And so it falls under contractors for the most part, contractors, and then I would say military civilians. Like I said, people who are hired by the military. But are civilians, and they're the ones who conduct that type of training. I think the nexus of it would have started with like sexual harassment prevention training, and then it's kind of expanded from there. Which I guess that would be an easier concept to swallow, where it's like, you probably shouldn't sexually harass women in the military. That's good policy. And then from there, we've expanded into, how you're supposed to talk to others in the military, and being considerate of people's racial backgrounds. Just as a personal example, I remember when I was in training, and there was a Muslim soldier who was going on and on about the last night of Ramadan, which happened to fall on September 11th, and I was getting tired of it. We were in a kind of a work study session, and I basically politely told him to give it a rest, to the point where it became a huge deal because it was in front of a group of fellow officers, and I got reprimanded for just telling him to please shut up. It's September 11th and I want to stop hearing about Ramadan. But what was weird is, while I got officially reprimanded, the same people who officially reprimanded me went behind and spoke to me afterward, and they agreed with what I said. So, but on paper, I could have potentially I did get in trouble, and potentially could have gotten in a lot more trouble for saying something as simple as that. So it's this concept of right speaking or correct thought upon religious and racial and sexual orientation is well and alive in the military, and becoming much more the common. In the back, maybe in the locker room, everyone could agree it was all bullshit. Now you can't even say that in the locker room.
Yeah, and that's got to be horrible for the kind of organization that needs to be rough and ready, right? Like, you need to build that trust, you need to build that cohesion, you need to be able to deal with very difficult things in the heat of the moment, and knowing that just telling someone to pipe down is going to get you in official trouble is
I mean,
that's something that people expect at like a university, but hearing that as a serving member is pretty ridiculous.
We used to joke that the biggest career killer wasn't a bullet; it was being in the same room as a female by yourself, because she could say anything at that point.
Well, and it's funny because
combat that you fear most of the time. I mean, sure, combat's dangerous. It's not fun being shot at, but career-wise, the classroom or the boardroom setting is a much more dangerous place than it is on the, than it is in combat. You run the risk of destroying your career through not saying the correct thing much more than you would, in a combat zone.
And it's wild because people will you hear it all the time. Oh, just what you let women into a combat role. What's the big deal? Like what's it's if as long as they can do the job. Well, yes. I mean, I think that's going to be obvious to many people listening here. But beyond the physical ability, this will always be the justification: is you just let them do the job. And of course, what they don't think about is the second and third order effects. They only think about, okay, well, G.I. Jane can do X number of push-ups, but they don't think about how down the line, like you said, not only is this going to affect the way that you have to behave, but it's also going to affect every other group, because all of a sudden every other group is looking and pushing for these same kind of speech restrictions and having to be treated this specific way, and all of a sudden
it's army unit cohesion, which is the intent. That's the point of the thing. Is you integrate units in order to destroy unit cohesion. That's the whole point. I mean, that's the cynical answer, is that when you have a combat unit where let's take a platoon where it's got females in it, and now you've got soldiers who are supposed to be focusing on the mission, worrying about who's sleeping with who, and you've got this high school-esque setting where their head's not in the game when it comes to the mission, but more worried about the daily bullshit of dealing with women on a daily basis in a combat zone. It's terrible. I've seen it destroy the morale and the cohesion of multiple units, and I secretly was very thankful that when I was deployed, I never had any females on my teams, and I had no particular control over that, because the job I did have females in it, but I was always very grateful not to have any on my team.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, when we started talking about kind of this type of training, you mentioned that a lot of civilians are being brought in to manage this and are given authority to enforce many of these things from the outside. I think in private you were calling them the commissars. Recruiting for commissar positions. Can you talk about that a little bit, kind of the outside civilian influence in these areas?
Sure. So you've taken what's happened is more and more. That's really funny, by the way. So it does sound like a bad anime. So you've actually taken away a lot of, not the responsibility of commanders, but the responsibility is still there, but their tools in order to affect their leadership environment, meaning their tools of command, have been restricted. So a lot of the decisions that they used to make in the past about any sort of infractions that soldiers or sailors or people, the enlisted, made, have now been taken away from them and then given over to civilian councils or officers or NCOs that have been specifically trained in certain areas. So so when it comes to like any sort of sexual harassment, let's say a soldier goes up to the commander and claims that they have been sexually harassed. Well, now the commander has basically a flow chart in order that they have to follow in order to deal with the situation. And they've basically been trained, these are the steps that you're going to take, and if you deviate this from any way, you're going to get in trouble. So you've taken away a commander's agency in order to deal with a situation that is affecting his or her unit. and in its place, you've now rely on civilian experts or specially trained NCOs or officers who that's their job, is only to deal with sexual harassment. So now that's just one example of how you've taken away commander agency. What you've found is it's actually happened in other areas where commanders need to make decisions as well, beyond just sexual harassment, where if it's a race issue, the commander no longer gets to make the decision on how that issue is going to be handled. And you're taking away more and more commander agency, and you're giving it to either civilians or specialized personnel, and which is completely destroying the command structure. When you have all the responsibility, when it's always your ass on the line, but you don't get to make any decisions on how a situation is going to be handled, then why are you there?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are listening will probably recognize this as kind of the final capture of Red Empire by Blue Empire. One of the things that we kind of talk about in neo-reactionary circles, which I know you're just kind of hearing about, so you might not know all the terminology, but we talk about...
Yes.
Yeah, but we talk about the cathedral, and we talk about basically kind of the soft power that's not held directly by elected officials, but is influenced by people like the universities, influenced by permanent bureaucracies that persist through different elected officials. And it tends to negate democracy because the people who are actually making the decisions at the end of the day are not the elected politicians or even, say, military commanders, but instead it's this perpetual bureaucracy and intellectual elite inside the cathedral, inside universities and that kind of thing. And what you're talking about, I think, actually sounds a lot like the cathedral being pushed into the military. The military commanders, the people who would actually know, and their first priority would be the success of their unit and the safety of their men. And instead, the priorities are being dictated by people who are in the cathedral, people who are university professors, feminist theory, critical race theory being pushed down through those civilians or specialized personnel into the inner workings of the military.
You basically you've created a parallel command structure of experts who have final say on how situations are going to be resolved that were normally under the purveyance of that commander. It's if you took a commander from, let's say, the 1940s and compared them to a commander today of any unit of any size, the lack of power that they have today compared to back then would be pretty stark, and it would be the commander from the 1940s would be shocked by how little a commander today actually has control over their units.
So let me ask you this, because I've been kicking this theory around a little bit, and I think it's going to prove to be true in the long run, as depressing as it might be. I think that as the average soldier is no longer someone who considers themselves a patriot, as they continue to receive training about how actually the military is evil and actually the United States is evil, and the only reason for it to exist is to right the past wrongs of like racism and such. I think that what we're going to see is a shift in justification for interventionism through critical race theory, because originally what we saw was, the interventionism, at least for the last couple decades, has been considered the purview of the right, but specifically a portion of the right, the neoconservatives. And as we've watched the last year or so, all the neoconservatives who have been slowly peeling themselves away from the Republican Party with the rise of Trump and his largely uninterventionist foreign policy have now been completely cut bait and run to the left. There you see Colin Powell and other people who are key architects of things like the Iraq War are now declaring themselves openly against the right, against the Republicans. And so I think what we're going to see is the continuation of neoconservative interventionist policy for the maintenance of like American empire and influence, but the justification now will shift from national security to critical race theory, to fixing the racist wrongs and the sexist wrongs and the homophobic wrongs that exist across the world. Do you think there's any merit to that? Do you think that's something that you might see in the future?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's worse than that. I think it's to the point where justification doesn't really even need to be required because the American people have no stake in the situation. You know, at a friend of mine, you know, we were talking. I was joking one time when I was in Afghanistan. It's like, here we are, Americans at war. I think I just saw something really dumb. One of the soldiers had done like completely wreck his vehicle or something like that in a really stupid way and trash it. I think I was against a concrete barrier, and you know, he said to me, is like, you know, man, America's not at war. We're at war. You know, the Army's at war. America's at the mall. Well, not anymore. Obviously, that's a dated statement.
Right.
But, you know, America's at the mall. They're not at war. We're the ones who are at war. And I often thought of that as the years have gone on. And it's true, you know, that disconnect that started with those base closures really reverberated into today, where the American people have no stake in what the military does beyond just vaguely what they may see on CNN or Fox News. And so it's sure you could use, you know, writing racial injustice or righting the wrongs of the past as justification for external conflict, but I don't even think they really need to do that. I mean, they can, you know, and sure, that's whatever, you know, you can use whatever. The point is, you could say it's to, you know, to save puppies in Uganda, and that would be enough justification for the American people to allow the military to go unleashed and go to war and do whatever it is that they feel they need to do. It doesn't matter anymore, I think, is the point. And that's a much scarier answer, I think, than a new justification for external conflict.
Well, actually, now that you bring that up, I think that's pretty interesting because we've talked before privately. But if you want to go into a little bit some of your experience in Afghanistan, because I think it does link to this, because I think that some of the ways that soldiers are being asked to participate in these conflicts, especially these long, drawn-out, functionally police actions instead of actual wars, where there's no clear victory, there's no clear plan in sight, they're not willing to, the rules of engagement are incredibly restrained, and there's no real vision for victory. Some of the things that I think that you guys have been asked to do in service of that conditions the military for exactly this. I know you've talked about, you know, just some of the ways, you know, the military has protected drug dealers and pedophiles in places like Afghanistan as course in order to secure those areas is something that would personally, of course, demoralize anyone. But I think it also trains the military to see these conflicts as just the job and not, like you said, something that needs justification. Yeah,
I mean, I think we lost the thread of the war in Afghanistan quite some time ago, if there ever was one to begin with. It's frustrating to, you know, to have a mission where there's no clear mission to go into a combat zone, and it's just kind of this vague, well, make it through and, you know, maybe plant a few trees and make things slightly better in your area of operations. Ideally, you know, a few less Afghanis will go and shoot at you at night. But, you know, it went all the way to the top. I don't know if you ever read the Washington Post about, it wasn't even, it's scary in itself that it wasn't really made much of a big deal of, but the Washington Post published a whole series of documents that they dubbed the Afghan Papers, which basically from 2001 all the way up until 2019 is when they were all released. It was all these after action reports and documentation from really high level civilian and military leadership who were involved in Afghanistan. And they knew it was, the COIN operations, this counterinsurgency operations, female engagement teams, this whole, community policing, that all these theories that they brought and tested in Afghanistan in order to stabilize the country, they knew in 2008 they weren't working, and yet they kept doubling down on them all the way up until, I would say, 2017, where these concepts that did not work and they knew did not work were continually fed to the rank and file, that if you just do this hard enough, or if you just keep trying on these failed concepts, that you're going to get peace in Afghanistan, which I guess was the vague mission concept, right? Peace in Afghanistan, a stable government, where the people can live in harmony, and even though it's a backwards Islamic dictatorship in essence, we'll get it all worked out. And that goal became so pervasive that all the steps along the way were ignored, or horrible people that we worked with, evil people that we worked with, were just considered the lesser of two evils. And so it was like, well, yeah, he rapes kids, but he's good for district stability, so we're going to keep him in power. And then this, this person over here, is completely corrupt and has millions of dollars, even though he supposedly lives in a mud hut, but he keeps everyone in line, so we're just going to leave him in power. I mean, these are inherently bad, evil people that we were working with who were on our side. Not to mention just the day-to-day random attacks by whoever, Afghans or Al Qaeda, or whoever you want to call them, bad people who wished us ill. Bad maligned actors was a popular term.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when there is no clear mission, right? Take this town and free these people, and if we get to Berlin by Christmas, the war will be over. When there is no goal, it's really hard to get behind the mission. And what was crazy is they kept feeding it to us, even though they knew it was unsuccessful.
Yeah, I think we had some interesting
their officer evaluation reports in order to get the next star, or in order to move on up in the hierarchy of the American government. I mean, Petraeus is a great example of that. The man, hook, line, and sinker fed the U.S. military COIN operations. And then he became head of the CIA and couldn't keep an affair secret. So, it's, if you want to look at like a modern day example of a career military officer, I think he's a really good example.
Well, the failing upwards is pretty evident in many situations. Do you think that there is a increase in that kind of thinking coming down from the top brass, especially those coming out of service academies?
Sure. So the old guard was gutted under Obama, and to a lesser extent at the end of, I would say, the Bush. I don't have much experience under anybody but Obama, really, as far as my time in the military. And the general officer corps was, people were either moved out, or there was a justification for removal of anyone who didn't toe the party line or toe the, the liberal agenda. And so you gutted the general officer corps, and then you move on down the line into your colonels, your majors, your captains. And then at the same time, I would say the university influence, right? You talk about the cathedral. Let's say the left has always been much more accepted within the university setting and even within the academies. That's true. which you would generally consider as a very conservative university, right? The military academies have become much less so. That's in my opinion. I did not go to a service academy, so I have less. I can't give you a more definitive answer on that one. But I would say, just from what I've read, and the articles are published online, and you've got a West Point Academy grad who is a dyed-in-the-wool communist. There's the metrics of which the success of these universities are being judged by, or how many racial minorities can be placed into them, when it should be a meritocracy, and race should not be a factor at all. And if any place there should be a meritocracy, it should be in these service academies. But it's not. It's about the color of your skin half the time, more than it is about how good you are at your job or what potential you may have. So you've got to squeeze from both ends. You've gutted the general officer corps, and you're influencing the younger officers who are coming up, who are now captains and majors. And so that's definitely they've got it from both ends.
I think we had a pair of interesting questions up here that are pretty similar, so I'll put them up. One gentleman, James, here, asking about how the loosening of restrictions in the military, do you think that will move it to a more liberal direction in general? And then another one here by Death by Cognitive Dissonance, talking about, do you feel like things like physical fitness have made it impossible for the military to recruit the way it used to, and is that impacting the ideological makeup of where the military might be going?
So I'll answer the second one first. When it comes to obesity, I think it's just a case of military standards for height and weight have not kept up with just the size difference in the American population. I don't mean just obesity. I mean, like, Americans are, after so many years of living in relatively stable conditions, are just physically bigger than other people. And I think it's a case of like, even compared to other, I would say, Westerners, like, right, take me versus an English person or an Australian person, and I'm just I'm fat right now, I'm not gonna lie, but even before that I was just physically bigger. And I think those restrictions those requirements have not really they haven't really developed in the last 20 years with what the new normal is, as far as what an American physically looks like. So I guess obesity does restrict certain people from joining the military. My answer to that is, you're fat and you should go run a lap, and stop being so chunky. And then the first question was, sorry, the first question again?
By removing some of the restrictions, lessening some of the entry requirements, do you think that will be allowing more people from a more liberal background into?
I don't know what restrictions they're really talking about. Sorry, these are kind of nuts and bolts questions.
Oh, sure, no problem. No, it's just something.
I mean, if you lower the standard, more people are going to be able to. In anything, the more people are going to be able to join. I mean, that I'm not really talking about the military at that point. I'm more talking about just like anything. If you lower a standard, you're going to have a larger pool of people to draw up from. Mm-hmm. But no, I don't think it's going to. If you lower, I don't know what standards you're really talking about. I'm assuming physical. If you lower the physical standards, I guess we're just going to have more people. Sorry, I don't really have much of an answer for that.
No, that's okay. It's I was just throwing it out there. So, guys,
sorry, I couldn't give a more definitive on that one.
Oh, no problem. So, guys, I'm gonna ask Ostrakon my last prepared question now. So, if you guys have anything that you'd like to ask him or me, it can be related to the topic or it can be something else. But if you guys have a question for either of us, you can go ahead and start putting those in the chat now, and we'll try to get to some of them at the end here. But I'm going to ask him my last question I had on our notes today. So I guess my last question is, we've had a lot of military brass, honestly. We've noticed, obviously, with the riots, we have a lot of National Guard people who don't seem to have taken their job seriously, doing TikTok dances and stuff with protesters. We've had a lot of brass who seem to have signaled that if Trump would have called in military forces to stop riots, they might not have actually heeded that call. And so my question, and if you can't answer it, or if you need to be careful with answering it, I totally understand. But as carefully as you can, do you think that if something, if there was a situation where the military did have to step in and restore order in some of these cities, especially post-election, with some of the hotspots we've seen continue, if they flared up even more post-election, do you think that there would be a no, or a possibility of a no, for military commanders?
Well, I'll answer your question with a bit of a parable. And I had this one chaplain that I would often go to when I needed advice, and he was a special forces operator. He was a Green Beret before he became a chaplain, and he'd lived a pretty rough and ready life, which he freely admitted. So he wasn't just somebody who hadn't experienced life before he became a chaplain. Mm-hmm. I only say that because sometimes chaplains can be a little far removed from the general population of soldiers sometimes. And I would always go to him for advice. But there was one time I asked him, does it bother him how his Christianity is being basically replaced or reduced within the U.S. military, and it's and how it's gone from a really big factor. Everyone used to go to church to now, he may get like 4 or 5 people that would go to services, and it's like, is it worth the fight? Are you doing the right thing? Do you worry you're not doing the right thing? And he said to me, yeah, every day. But he also told me, you can't fall on your sword every day. And there may come a time where I need to change what I'm doing in my life, or I need to make a stand for my viewpoints in order for the good of the military and for the good of the people of the United States. But if you do choose to do that, it's going to be the last thing you ever do. You can't fall on your sword every day. So what I guess that's in a really roundabout way of what I'm saying is, should commanders choose to get involved in the internal politics of the United States, it's going to be one of the last things that they ever do.
Yeah.
Answer your question at all?
No, it does. Yeah. And I think that's probably a good thing for all of us to remember. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have hills to die on, but you really want to make sure that that's the hill.
You make sure that's the hill
because you may die on it.
Because you only get one shot.
Right. Nope, I think that's a good answer. And I think that also answers one of the questions we had in chat for you there, was talking about, would the military protect the public if this continues, or would they be more loyal to the empire? And I think, you and I have talked about, that probably breaks down. That's probably not a unified decision.
No, it's down to the individual commander and their life experience, and where they see themselves, and where their internal loyalties lie at that point. Because should that happen, should we get to that point, the United States as we know it doesn't exist anymore. And it's I think a lot of people have that question: where does the military fall in the case of of a second civil war or a large scale insurrection. And you really have to think about it as the military is not a monolithic organization. It's a group of people who have all their own prejudice and things that they hold dear. And what you're going to find is it's going to be down to those individual commanders, individual soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and even those Coast Guard guys.
I was wondering if you get the Coast Guard.
Yeah, no. And it's going to be, at the end of the day, it's going to be what's inside their heart and what they choose to do with their life and how they choose to live it in very uncertain times. And
all right.
I have an answer for you.
No, I mean, that's
down to the individual.
That is a good answer, and it's the right answer, and it's the one we need to keep in mind. I think that is probably a good thing for people to remember. So as we're wrapping up here, guys, I think we went through most of the questions we have in chat, but is there anything that you wanted to leave people with about the military that we didn't talk about? Anything that maybe they don't know or that you wish they knew kind of about the military experience and what's going on right now?
Yeah, it's anything to take away. I think my last comment was the big takeaway. It's not a monolithic organization. It's made of people, and I guess if you'd like to know more about, it depends on if it's something you're interested in joining the military, you're having a military, obviously talking to as many people as you can and getting as many perspectives as you can before you join. If that's something that you're interested in doing, I think is a great idea. If you, even if you're not, have no interest in joining the military, having, just being aware of its presence, I think is important. Like I said, seek them out when you can. Maybe talk to them about their personal experiences. Take it with a grain of salt, because everyone's personal experiences are going to be different, and a lot of veterans are, I would say, bitter by the way things have turned out in their personal careers. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But if you want to know, get to know people who are in the military in your community. It'll have more of an impact on your perspective of military life. And then also, take an interest when it comes to global politics and
because
what
it's about to take an
actually doing on a daily basis. I mean, the information's out there. It's just not often front page news. So there's a lot of resources out there if you have any sort of interest in where the military is and what they're actually doing out there. Those resources can be available to you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks. And guys, thank you for stopping by. We've had a lot of people on, a lot of great comments, very active chat, a lot of great questions. So I really thank you guys for coming by. Don't forget to hit subscribe and like if you have a chance. And I have, in honor of Settler's Lament being on last stream, I have set up a subscribe star so I can grift properly. Don't feel any obligation, but if you do want to throw something in the tip jar, that is in the comments for the video. All right, well, let me say thank you again to American Ostrakon. I think this was a really good chat. I think there's a lot of good insights here, and I really want to thank you for coming on, man.
Did you I don't know what your timetable is like, but did you want to try and answer a few more questions from the audience, or was it?
Oh, well, I think I went through and I think we got most of the ones.
Okay, that's fine.
We worked a lot of them into our chat today.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again for stopping by, and I hope you have a great one. We'll talk to you next time.